For 12 years of marriage, I suspected my wife for the first time because her smile had changed. Turns out she was smiling, thinking about how to hide the $400,000 she lost at the gambling table from me. But I already knew everything, and Monday morning had a big surprise for her. For 12 years of marriage, I suspected my wife for the first time because her smile had changed. Turns out she was smiling, thinking about how to hide the $400,000 she lost at the gambling table from me. But I already knew everything, and Monday morning had a big surprise for her. My name is Nathan Brooks, 44 years old, senior financial analyst at Henderson Investment Group in downtown Chicago. I met Sarah at a charity gala in 2011. She was volunteering for the Children's Hospital fundraiser, wearing a simple blue dress, her auburn hair pulled back in an elegant bun. When she smiled at me across the crowded ballroom, I knew she was different. She had this way of making everyone around her feel special, like they were the most important person in the room. We were married 8 months later in a small ceremony at Oak Ridge Country Club. Sarah insisted we keep it intimate, just family and close friends. She said she preferred meaningful moments over grand gestures. Our honeymoon was a 2-week trip to Tuscany, where we rented a small villa and spent our days exploring vineyards and our nights planning our future together. Sarah was everything I thought I wanted in a partner. She was thoughtful, organized, and had this incredible ability to remember the smallest details about people. She would send birthday cards to my co-workers' children, organize neighborhood block parties, and volunteer at 3 different charities. Everyone who met her would tell me how lucky I was to have found such a perfect wife. For years, our life followed a comfortable routine. I would leave for work at 7:30 each morning, and Sarah would have coffee ready and my lunch packed. She worked part-time at the local library, organizing reading programs for children. Evenings were spent cooking dinner together, watching movies, or having friends over for dinner parties that Sarah planned with military precision. But 6 months ago, something shifted. It started small, almost imperceptible changes that I might have missed if I had not been trained to notice patterns and anomalies in financial data. Sarah began staying out later on her volunteer nights. She would come home energized, almost giddy, but when I asked about her day, her answers became vague and evasive. The first real warning sign came when I noticed our joint savings account balance had dropped by $15,000. When I asked Sarah about it, she said she had made a donation to the Children's Hospital for their new wing construction. It seemed reasonable, charitable even, so I did not question it further. Sarah had always been generous with her time and money when it came to helping others. 3 weeks later, another $20,000 disappeared. This time, Sarah said her sister Emma needed help with medical bills after her husband lost his job. Again, it was plausible. Sarah and Emma had always been close, and family emergencies happen. But something in Sarah's eyes when she told me this story made me pause. There was a flicker of something I'd never seen before, a hesitation that lasted just a fraction of a second. That night, I called Emma directly. The conversation was brief but devastating. Emma had no medical bills. Her husband had not lost his job. In fact, they had just returned from a vacation in Florida and were doing better financially than they had in years. When I asked if Sarah had mentioned needing money for anything, Emma laughed and said Sarah had actually been talking about how well we were doing financially. I hung up the phone and sat in my car for 20 minutes, trying to process what I had just learned. My perfect wife had lied to me about $35,000. But why? What could she possibly need that much money for that she could not tell me about? The next morning, I decided to take a different approach. Instead of confronting Sarah directly, I would use the skills that had made me successful in financial analysis. I would investigate, gather evidence, and only then make my move. If Sarah was hiding something significant enough to lie about $35,000, there was likely much more beneath the surface. I started by reviewing our credit card statements and bank records more carefully. What I found made my stomach drop. Over the past 6 months, there had been a pattern of cash withdrawals, always on Thursday evenings, always from the same location downtown. The amounts varied between $500 and $2,000, but they added up to nearly $60,000 in total. The address of the automated teller machine was on Riverside Drive, in an area of the city I knew Sarah had no reason to visit. There were no volunteer organizations, no friends, no family anywhere near that neighborhood. It was primarily an entertainment district with restaurants, bars, and according to my research, several establishments that operated in legal grey areas. Thursday came, and Sarah announced she would be working late at the library. She said they were reorganizing the children's section and needed volunteers to help move books. She kissed me goodbye at the front door, her smile as bright and loving as always. But now I could see something else behind it. A performance, carefully crafted and rehearsed. I waited 30 minutes after she left, then drove to the library. Sarah's car was not in the parking lot. The building was dark except for the security lights. I called the main number and spoke to Margaret, the head librarian who knew Sarah well. Margaret was confused when I asked about the evening volunteer session. There was no book reorganization scheduled. In fact, the library closed at 6 on Thursdays and had been doing so for years. My hands were shaking as I drove toward Riverside Drive. I had no plan beyond finding out where my wife was really spending her Thursday evenings. The cash withdrawal location was outside a place called Golden Palace Restaurant. It looked ordinary enough from the outside, with red lanterns hanging by the entrance, and a small sign advertising authentic cuisine. I parked across the street and waited. At 8:15 I saw her. Sarah walked out of a side entrance I had not noticed before. Her face flushed, her usually perfect hair slightly disheveled. She looked around nervously before walking to the automated teller machine. I watched her insert her card and make a withdrawal, the same routine she had apparently been following for months. But she did not leave. Instead, she walked back to that side entrance and disappeared inside again. I sat in my car for another hour, watching other people come and go through the same entrance. Most were well-dressed, middle-aged professionals like myself. Some looked excited as they entered. Others appeared frustrated or defeated as they left. When Sarah finally emerged again at nearly 10 o'clock, I knew exactly what Golden Palace Restaurant really was. Her body language told the complete story. The way she walked with her head down, the defeated slope of her shoulders, the way she clutched her purse tightly against her chest. I had seen that same posture in documentaries about gambling addiction. My perfect wife was not volunteering at the library on Thursday nights. She was gambling away our future, one withdrawal at a time. But this discovery was just the beginning of unraveling a web of lies that would prove to be far more extensive and devastating than I had ever imagined possible. Over the next 2 weeks, I conducted what could only be described as a forensic audit of our financial life. What I discovered was worse than I had feared. Sarah had not just been gambling away our savings. She had been systematically dismantling our financial security with the precision of someone who understood exactly how much damage she could inflict before I would notice. The first major revelation came when I accessed our home equity line of credit online. We had opened it 3 years ago for potential renovations that never happened. The available balance had been $45,000. Now it showed zero. Sarah had withdrawn the entire amount over the past 4 months, always in increments small enough to avoid triggering automatic notifications to my email address. But that was only the beginning of her financial deception scheme. I discovered she had opened 2 credit cards in her name using our house as collateral. Both were maxed out, totaling another $38,000 in debt. The monthly payments were being automatically deducted from our joint checking account, buried among legitimate expenses like utilities and insurance premiums. Then I found the loan paperwork hidden in her desk drawer. Sarah had taken out a personal loan for $50,000 from a private lending company. The interest rate was astronomical, nearly 30% annually, but it required no credit check and minimal documentation. The only requirement was proof of asset ownership, which she had provided by showing our house deed and title documents. The mathematics were absolutely devastating for our future. In 6 months, Sarah had accumulated approximately $200,000 in debt and gambling losses. Our house, which we had owned free and clear, was now leveraged to its maximum value. If she continued at this pace for another month, we would be facing complete bankruptcy and financial ruin. But what disturbed me more than the money was the sophistication of her deception. Sarah had not stumbled into gambling addiction randomly. She had researched how to hide financial transactions, how to access credit without spousal notification, and how to maintain her perfect wife facet while systematically destroying our life together. I found evidence of this planning in her laptop, which she had carelessly left unlocked one morning. Her browsing history showed months of research into gambling strategies, debt consolidation services, and most chillingly, divorce procedures in our state. She had downloaded forms for asset division and spousal support calculations. The timeline became crystal clear. Sarah was not just gambling compulsively. She was preparing for an exit strategy. She planned to rack up as much debt as possible in joint accounts and secured against our shared assets, then file for divorce and claim financial hardship. In our state, gambling debts incurred during marriage could be considered marital debt, meaning I would be responsible for half of everything she had lost. It was a brilliant plan, really. She would walk away with half of whatever remained, while leaving me to deal with the creditors and the mess she had created. The perfect wife image would work in her favor during divorce proceedings. Everyone who knew us would testify to her character while painting me as the controlling husband who drove her to desperate measures. But Sarah had made one critical error in her calculations. She had underestimated my ability to uncover her scheme, and she had no idea that I was already 10 steps ahead of her strategic planning. While she was planning her escape, I was documenting every single transaction. Monday morning would prove to be very educational for both of us. The weekend before my planned confrontation, I made one final discovery that sealed Sarah's fate. While organizing our home office, I found a second phone hidden in her jewelry box. It was an older model, probably purchased with cash to avoid any paper trail connected to our accounts. When I powered it on, I discovered months of text messages that revealed the true scope of her betrayal. The messages were not just with loan sharks or gambling contacts. Sarah had been in communication with a divorce attorney for 3 months. The conversations were detailed and calculating. She had asked about hiding assets, claiming domestic financial abuse, and strategies for maximizing her settlement while minimizing her responsibility for the debts she had created. One particular exchange made my blood run cold. Sarah had asked the attorney about the timeline for filing papers. His response was clear. Wait until the husband discovers the gambling debt, let him react angrily, then use his anger as evidence of an abusive relationship. The attorney had even recommended that Sarah document any heated conversations or arguments that might arise when the financial situation was revealed. But the most damaging messages were with someone named Marcus Chen, who appeared to be more than just a gambling contact. Their conversations had been going on for 4 months, and they were planning to move in together once Sarah finalized her divorce. Marcus had been advising her on financial strategies and had even offered to help her establish credit in another state. The plan was elegant in its cruelty. Sarah would file for divorce, claim I had hidden assets and controlled her financially, then move across the country with Marcus while I dealt with the legal and financial aftermath. She had already researched apartments in Phoenix and had been discussing job opportunities with Marcus, who apparently owned a small business there. Monday morning arrived with unseasonable warmth for October. Sarah made coffee as usual, packed my lunch with the same attention to detail she had shown for 12 years, and kissed me goodbye at the front door. She had no idea that this would be the last normal morning of her carefully constructed deception. I drove to work but did not go to my office. Instead, I met with Patricia Walsh, the attorney I had consulted the previous week. Patricia specialized in fraud cases and had extensive experience with gambling addiction divorces. When I showed her the evidence I had compiled, including photographs of the hidden phone and screenshots of Sarah's text messages, her expression grew serious. The strategy we developed was multifaceted. First, we would file for legal separation immediately, citing irreconcilable differences and requesting an emergency injunction to freeze all joint assets. Second, we would present evidence of the gambling debt and fraudulent loans to demonstrate that Sarah had violated her fiduciary duty as a spouse. At 3 o'clock that afternoon, while Sarah was supposedly volunteering at the library, but actually at Golden Palace restaurant, court papers were served at her real location. A process server walked into the gambling establishment and publicly served her with divorce papers, freezing injunctions, and a motion for emergency asset protection. According to the process server, Sarah's reaction was immediate and devastating. She went completely pale, then began crying hysterically in front of dozens of other gamblers and staff members. The perfect composure she had maintained for months crumbled in seconds when she realized that her carefully laid plans had been discovered and turned against her. That evening, I sat in our living room, waiting for Sarah to come home. She arrived at nearly midnight, her eyes red from crying, her usual perfect appearance dishevelled and broken. She looked at me sitting calmly in my chair and asked the question I'd been waiting to hear. "How long have you known?" "Long enough," I replied, my voice steady and calm. I'd rehearsed this moment for weeks, but seeing Sarah broken and desperate in our living room felt surreal. The woman who had carefully orchestrated our financial destruction for months was now standing before me like a stranger. Sarah collapsed onto the couch across from me, her hands shaking. She tried to compose herself, to find some remnants of the perfect wife persona that had served her so well, but the facade was completely shattered. "Nathan, I can explain everything. The gambling, it got out of control. I never meant for it to go this far." I pulled out a folder containing printouts of her text messages and placed it on the coffee table between us. She stared at the papers without picking them up, already knowing what they contained. "I know about Marcus," I said quietly. "I know about Phoenix. I know about the divorce attorney and the strategy to paint me as abusive." Her face went completely white. The carefully practiced explanations she had probably prepared died on her lips. There was no point in denying anything now. The evidence was overwhelming, and we both knew it. "How much did you lose?" she whispered, though we both knew she was really asking how much trouble she was in. $200,000, give or take, I replied. But the money was never really the issue, was it? You were planning to leave anyway. The gambling was just your way of taking as much as possible on your way out while setting me up to take the blame. Sarah began crying again, but there was something calculated about it, even now. She was still trying to manipulate the situation, to find some angle that would work in her favor. "Nathan, please. We can work this out. I made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but we can get counseling. Marcus is expecting you in Phoenix next week," I said. "You already gave your notice at the library. You researched apartments and job opportunities. This was never about gambling addiction, Sarah. This was about stealing as much as you could before starting over with someone else." When I turned back to face her, Sarah had stopped crying. The mask had finally come off completely, and I could see the cold calculation that had been hiding underneath our entire marriage. She was evaluating her options, trying to determine if there was still some way to salvage her plan. "The court froze everything," she said finally. "Everything," I confirmed. "Joint accounts, credit cards, the house, even the loan money you had not spent yet." "Patricia Walsh is very good at her job." Sarah's expression hardened. "You think you are so smart, don't you? Setting me up, gathering evidence, playing the victim. You have no idea what it was like being married to someone who controlled every aspect of our financial life." And there it was. Even caught completely red-handed, Sarah was still trying to flip the narrative. She was still attempting to portray herself as the victim of my financial control, despite having secretly accessed hundreds of thousands of dollars without my knowledge. The divorce proceedings took 8 months to finalize. Sarah fought every aspect of the settlement, claiming emotional distress and financial abuse. But the evidence was overwhelming. Her own text messages proved premeditation and intent to defraud. The court held her personally responsible for all gambling debts and fraudulent loans. Marcus Chen, it turned out, had been running a similar scheme with other women in different cities. When investigators looked into his background, they discovered a pattern of targeting married women with assets, encouraging them to accumulate debt, then moving on when situations became complicated. In the end, I kept our house and most of our legitimate assets. Sarah moved to Phoenix alone, her relationship with Marcus having ended when the legal complications became too much for him to handle. The perfect wife had been an illusion, but the life I built afterward was finally real.